Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you, and welcome to the Tomorrow's Ummah Podcast, where we explore experiences, struggles, and triumphs of growing up as a Muslim in the West. Today, the topic of our conversation is the struggles as a young Muslim growing up in a Western society. I think we have a lot to talk about today. Today, I'm joined with Dr. Abdullah al-Qadri and my dear brother Abdullah Sheikh as well. I think we can start the conversation by sort of defining what the modern Muslim is. And I think we know what a Muslim is, hopefully, but we can also define that. And let's further talk about what it means to be a Muslim today and what struggles you face as a Muslim. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself, so if you want to get started, definitely go.
Yeah, I think in order to understand what a Muslim is in the West, I think it's imperative that we understand what a Muslim is. Because I think especially over the past, I would say, 100 years or so, we've kind of grown distant from the root of what it means to be a Muslim. And that is literally to follow or to be an individual who only obeys the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we've decided to, and obviously with the advent of technology, with the advent of all of these different features that kind of bring books right to our doorstep, that bring lectures right to our doorstep, we've kind of taken the onus upon ourselves to define what Islam is to ourselves. And what that tends to do is it oversimplifies a lot of these matters. For example, you'll start justifying your own bad deeds by overestimating or underestimating the rahmah or the ghazab, the punishments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or you will overestimate your capacity to do good in a grand scheme of your life. So you'll be, I often, kids come to me and the parents bring them to me for mentoring, for coaching. I had one child just on Wednesday, so a couple of days ago now, he came to me and his mother had complained. MashaAllah, they have a very good relationship, the mother and the child. And she complained to me that the child is starting to do weed. And he's 16 years old. He's a Muslim, MashaAllah. Memorize Surah Rahman, memorize Surah Mulk, memorize Surah Yasin. So I asked the child, I say, well, what's up? What's going on? Why the weed, bro? So he says, I had to try it. Everyone has to try things for once. And so when I tried it, I didn't really like it, so I'm never going to do it again. But you and I know, we're old enough and we've seen enough that once you try one drug, it's a very slippery slope downward. So it's very imperative for us to understand what a Muslim is in today's, in the grand scheme of the history of Islam, and really go back to when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam brought Islam down and how he wanted us to live as a Muslim, not how we want to live as a Muslim. Because again, Islam isn't do whatever the hell you want. Islam is follow the will of Allah.
And some people might see that as a bit overwhelming at first, understanding the concept. Yep. And here's my reasoning. When we talk about identity, when we talk about who we are, we're talking about setting boundaries for ourselves, especially for youth living here. I think we all grew up in Canada, right? We went to school here. We made friends here, no matter what faith they were. We were interacting with people every single day, wherever we went. But then our parents, I think I'm very grateful for them. They taught me what boundaries to set. And those boundaries were obviously within the teachings of Islam, the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I'm fortunate that I sort of built those boundaries without thinking twice. But I think we're so there's so much information coming at us now for youth. I've seen kids in middle school who know how to use social media so accurately, and they're engaging with so much content.
You have 3 years old with Instagram accounts nowadays.
There you go. So all that content coming at them, so they don't know how to sift out the right information and where to set those boundaries, right? I think, I have an issue with that because the problem is if you start forming lax boundaries, where does it stop? So there's a age-old argument amongst theologists, especially Islamic theologists, that when somebody comes into Islam, don't bombard them with Islamic philosophy. So if they just want to pray Fajr, leave them be. If they just want to pray Isha, leave them be. Tell them you have to pray 5 times a day. The issue is, what if at some point you forget to teach them the rest and they live their remaining life only praying Fajr because you relax and because they weren't able to reconnect with you, or they pass away, or they impart that knowledge to another person? Yeah.
Doesn't that kind of lose that almost amazing fabric of Islam where everyone is unified, at least in the 5 tenets of Islam?
Yeah, I mean,
That's an
a
interesting
true point.
question.
That is. I mean, Abdullah, like you in this society, we've grown up together. I've seen you go to the mosque every single day. MashaAllah, you're always there. You're engaged in these halaqah. You're engaged with gathering youth together. You're reciting nasheed and qasaid and all these different things. Now, how do you, separate that identity? Do you separate that identity? How do you let that identity flow into who you are today, walking around, engaging with people at work or wherever it may be?
I feel like as a youngster, I would kind of have a separate identity for that part of my life where even Muslim friends that I had in school didn't know that part of me. Up until, I started coming to the masjid more, I started listening to lectures more and how I should be more proud of my faith. Right? Like I grew up with kids whose name was Muhammad, but they'd call themselves Mo because they were ashamed of the name. Right? So as I grew older and I brought those kids into my circle and I was like, guys, look, this is me. Now, even 2 of my non-Muslim friends, they know this part of my life as well, where they're like, oh, he recites Islamic poetry. That's what they call it. They're like Islamic songs. And it's funny now because I'll be sitting with them and they're like, yo, you're reading that Islamic song once. Can we hear it? And we're just in a random restaurant and I'm just over there going, Mawla ya Sal, and they're just enjoying it. But that's all it was. I feel like when I was younger, I did have a separate identity, but now I've made it part of my life. And wherever I go, I want people to know that it's something I'm proud of and it's something that's a part of me.
Which I am seeing the trend go up now. I think at least in
The trend of a unified Muslim identity?
yeah, or just like portraying your Muslim identity. I think people are a lot more confident now of it. I think that conversation was very different, probably 10, 20 years ago, or maybe during our parents' time.
Yeah.
I've heard many stories. Even I think there was families in London that we know that have gone through that Islamophobia, right? Or even families all around that have struggled with people attacking them for their religion.
Yeah.
Now, compared to how many of those instances there were maybe 20 or 30 years ago, we are engaging at it maybe at different levels now, right? So, for example, we feel that maybe information and how information is coming out about Muslims, they say that leaders are indoctrinating kids when they're teaching them about Islam, right? At madrasas or wherever it may be. So we just talked about learning about Islam. Now we're talking about those children going to the mosque to simply learn about, the fiqh or the 5 pillars of Islam. But that's become, in some instances, if you give it like a bad lens, indoctrinating, right? So Islam can be given that lens from certain perspectives, right? So people do struggle at that capacity of things. And we face many different challenges as Muslims growing up. Now, I'm grateful that I feel like throughout my life, I got very lucky that I didn't have to struggle with that. Maybe at school, my representation, if I asked, I got a space to pray. If I asked, I can go to an empty classroom, I can pray during my lunch breaks. But maybe that case was very different 20, 30 years ago. So there is an uptick. And I would give credit to that uptick to our online presence, to how, modern day influencers are a lot more open about their Muslim identity, about doing da'wah work and, religious and political spaces and whatnot.
But I think there's a couple of things that you guys all said, and I want to touch a little bit upon all of them. The first thing that I think, before I touch on, Ali, your topic or your point was the Muslim identity. So it was very interesting that he had mentioned that he had amalgamated his Muslim identity into his life. Whereas I think a lot of the youth today really do struggle with that. Yeah. So let's say you play COD. You've got that whole personality that you have this online presence of COD. You act completely different with that group of friends. Then you act completely different with your parents and your siblings. Then you act completely different than when you're in high school. And that high school presence might be very similar to that online presence, but it's still remotely different. Then you have this presence when you go to the mosque. For a child, especially who's developing and the brain is developing, all of a sudden their brain is being pulled in 4 different directions. And at some point, you've got to come to a term with one of those identities that you stick with. The problem is that historically speaking, and by historically, I'm saying the last 40, 50 years, the Muslim hasn't picked the Muslim identity for the vast majority in the West, I mean. right? They've tended to leave that Muslim identity for business, for the Western culture, so to speak. And I think that, as you mentioned now, that the Muslim identity is becoming more mainstream is because there are now more Muslims in the West. You'll see more hijabis. You'll see more, like, for example, at McMaster University, Western, my brother goes to Western, you went to Western high school. You'll see people with kufis and topis all of a sudden. Whereas when I was the only one who wore a topi in elementary school, and I was like literally called Abdullah Topi Wala in my elementary school, and I was ashamed to take it off. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was a psychological thing with me. But anyways, but now you go to any elementary school in Toronto downtown, you'll see kids going up to school in white jubbas.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly mainstream now.
Yeah.
Whereas you can't. But I think part of the reason is now what's happened is there's more Muslims. It's now socially acceptable.
Yeah.
But it's because of the fact that I think the mentality hasn't changed. They just deem it okay because there are now more people who act just like the way you do.
Yeah.
So I think that the mentality still is there, and we need to work on that mentality, because that same mentality becomes toxic when somebody introduces you to the, I don't want to say the right part, but a different opinion of Islam. You're still rigid. And you're like, no, wait a second. It's Muharram. Why are we talking about the Ahlul Bayt all the time?
Yeah.
That's a Shia thing. That's not a Sunni thing.
Yeah.
Whereas the Ahlul Bayt is a part of Iman for both Shia and Sunni. So definitely we still need to understand the identity that we have as Muslims, and we still need to get to the core principle, which is be proud of being a Muslim. Now we can talk about how we can do that, but
Yeah, being proud of being a Muslim means definitely many different things.
yeah.
I think about challenges sometimes. I said I'm very grateful. I didn't face Islamophobia, for example, directly. I had supporting spaces, supporting people, friends. Your family, I'm the youngest of 5 siblings, so they've definitely been through it.
Sure, yeah.
But I was sheltered from a lot of those things,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm the youngest, the baby of the family. You don't face those certain things. But I know when I went to high school that you start to become your own person. And when you're a teenager and you're becoming your own person, you sort of have this mentality that I can figure it out,
Yeah.
that I can figure out Islam, I can figure out school, I can figure out, who I'm around and how I am. And I think that independency, it can go really wrong really quickly.
Do you think, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but do you think that's almost a symptom of overconfidence in that person that goes to high school that thinks like that?
I think it's just how culture is here. I don't know if it has to do
Like
with
that independent.
Yeah, like becoming independent, and that's a old age philosophy thing where in the West people are hyper fixated on individualism,
Yeah.
and then in the East, there are communities being built. People are
It's more community driven.
a lot more community driven. People work together. They focus on raising children together and focus on and there's drawbacks and good things for both sides. But when I went to school, I found that individualism sometimes got in the way. And I'm going to use a very, very simple example. You and your friend groups, and I see this a lot more now, you hear children swearing all the time. It is absolutely ridiculous how much people swear now, right? Like they use vulgar language
Yep.
as a form of endearment. Since when was speaking kindly to someone using vulgar language? Like, have you run into that, Abdullah?
Like kids cussing at me.
Yeah.
But
See,
go for it.
So I go to LA Fitness, yeah, and I'm at LA Fitness. We're doing a bar run, and there's like high schoolers coming in, and they like nowadays high schoolers. I don't know what it is. They don't look like high schoolers to me. They look like middle schoolers, right? And I'm like, oh, these are kids. They're coming in. We're playing basketball, and all of a sudden, I'm hearing all sorts of like vulgar language, and I'm like, bro, what is going on, right? And it's pretty weird, and seeing it because when we go to the masjid, we don't see kids our age or younger than us cussing like that, but.
Yeah.
I feel like it's kind of become the norm.
I'm
now.
actually going to push back on that. I was just in the mosque, I think 2 days ago.
Yeah.
We were in Jama'at for Maghrib. And I think throughout the whole prayer, I heard kids cussing again and again. And it's
Not
sort
in
of
the prayer though.
No. Like they were playing in the back.
I think I know what he's talking about.
And,
I think I heard
it's
of
sort
that
of
too.
like you got to ask yourself the question,
Yeah.
do these kids know that, okay, first of all, what those words are they're using?
Yeah.
And second of all, where they're using it, right? We and Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has said that, you know, you find success in controlling your tongue.
Yes.
and
controlling the way you speak. And if we normalize vulgar language, what does that do to the personalities of tomorrow?
I think that's the issue in the West, where vulgar language has just kind of been like normalized, and it's not a good thing. Obviously, like I hear teachers cussing, and obviously that's.
I think what we need to look at is why. We've understood that happens.
Yeah.
But what is the reason, like the root cause, if you really analyze it, why has cussing become the norm? So what do you guys think about that? Like, everyone does it. Everyone listening does it. And to be honest with you, every Pakistani uncle does it just as much as the 9-year-old, you know, or the 10-year-old. I've seen them.
Different language,
but it's the same vulgarity.
Thing, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So why has it become a norm? What do you guys think? I'll give you a psychological reason that I've studied, but I want to hear your guys' input a little bit.
I'm a firm believer everything starts at home.
Okay.
I think that definitely youth nowadays, we spend so much time in school. How many hours do you spend in a day? Like 7 hours?
8 hours probably.
In school. So, okay, you may learn it there.
Yeah.
But at least when you go home, if you speak something like that, your parents, depending on how much time they spend with you, they will either know or not know what language it is that you use, or whether it's vulgar or clean language, right? Now, why we use it and how we figure out, right? I think it's a lot of it has to do with reactionary things, right? We tend to express our emotions using different words in different instances. Now, we've learned to replace certain instances now with saying, MashaAllah, Subhanallah, Allah Mubarak, right? When we get happy, for example, about things, find something beautiful, right? When I get angry at something, I'll say astaghfirullah, right? Or from the sunnah, we find ways of how to not get angry anymore. So Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam taught us to, if we are sitting, stand, right? If you're standing, sit, or lay down, or move away and step away from that place.
Drink a sip of water.
Yeah.
Right? Or if you're in jalal, and if you're in anger, go and do wudu. Cleanse yourself, right? Purify yourself with water, for anger comes from fire, right? And so we found these ways to react to our different emotions, but I think nowadays we react to our emotions using vulgar language. And that's sort of where my theory is. There's probably some science behind it, but what do you think?
I think let's bring it back to social media. I think media plays a huge role in it. The TV shows that we watch, social media clips that we see, influencers that we see from the West, they've kind of normalized. Like, I don't think my parents, if I'm on my phone, if I'm on TikTok or I'm on Instagram and I'm scrolling, my parents, and I have headphones, and my parents don't know what I'm listening to. But you see those influencers and those people using all these vulgar words and stuff, and you kind of think it's the cool thing to do. And as a kid, when you see somebody like, oh, he's getting respect for saying something like that, you're like, yo, let me try it at school. And I think that's kind of where I think it kind of starts from, where it's like media and social media play a huge role in it.
See, for me, vulgarity exists, right? We've kind of established that. But I think vulgarity is as bad as when an individual is speaking, they begin to use words like, you know what I mean? Like. And I think part of the reason is that we have the concepts within our thoughts, but we don't have the vocal or vocabulary ammunition to be able to turn those thoughts into reasonable words so that the other person can understand what he's saying.
So how to express it.
Exactly. And so what that ends up doing is you start using words like, you start using words like, know what I mean? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And so, yeah, you get me.
We're not well spoken anymore.
Exactly. So I think what that's led us to do is, well, what can I say and how easy can I say it, going back to what you were saying, that will express what I'm feeling in this instant to everyone who's listening to me.
True.
Usually that begins with F word.
Yeah.
You know, or that'll begin with this word. In Urdu, that'll be with like the B word.
Yeah, like how do you exaggerate something? You use the F word sometimes.
Right, and so that they will feel exactly what I'm feeling in this instant, and I'll be able to be in the exact same, connect with them and be in the same brain wavelength as them. That way they will feel my emotion.
Yeah.
And I think this is literally a global pandemic or epidemic amongst the youth. I honestly believe that.
I think what you just hit on in terms of saying like and in situations being equivalent to, vulgarity, for example.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to school presentations
Yeah.
where you got subtracted points for
saying,
simply
yeah.
buying time
Yeah.
or finding the right words, because it means you do not have that vocabulary or that literacy,
Yeah.
right? They would judge your literacy or your ability to speak in certain situations based on your vocabulary.
Yeah.
You want to know something really interesting? In my opinion, I don't believe, I haven't read any study about this, but I feel the more educated you become, the more you read, the more degrees you have. It doesn't have to be simply about degrees, but the more educated you become as a whole, your vulgarity level decreases.
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting phenomenon, because you begin to think, wait a second, I don't need to use this. Let me actually express how I'm feeling. And he will understand 100%, and there will be a better connection than if I just said this word or that word.
And I think we can find a lot of Islamic sources in our own religion, examples that tell us to speak less. And Rasulullah
Sallallahu
always
Alaihi Wasallam.
spoke with purpose.
Oh, yes.
Everything that was said was with purpose. And I think we look at it like renowned speakers now. They're not always talking and yapping.
No.
Like they're not yapping all the time.
No,
they
not at
are
all.
carefully selecting their words to ensure that nothing is taken out of proportion.
And those are the most successful speakers, especially speakers who the youth today will listen to. Because
Yeah.
there are some speakers who will go on and on and on, and they won't hit the nail on the head. And then there's another speaker who will just go right in, direct to the point, maybe add an emotional kind of backstory to it, a sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They're like, I understand that concept.
Yeah.
I'm going to take away from that.
Yeah.
Whereas other speakers talk for 2 hours, and you go home and you're like,
What did I just listen
What
to?
did I listen to? Or you may feel like emotionally very like, you're ready to do something for a little while.
motivated. Yeah.
But yeah, you'll feel motivated. But tomorrow you wake up and you're like, what did I even learn?
Yeah.
What did I take home with me? And that's interesting because non-Islamic, right, sources, like I'm talking scholars, for example, there's lots of motivational speakers nowadays. Andrew Tate, right? I have to say it. They speak words and they hide some sort of, purpose behind those words that, eventually it gets to youth's minds and people who are listening to their minds, right? Because you are listening to that person speak. It sounds coherent. It sounds well-spoken. And because they hit both of those tick marks, it's like, okay, that person knows what they're talking about. If I listen to, a professor nowadays, or even some high school teachers, if they stutter or say or are buying time, you lose interest in your class.
Yeah.
Simply, right? The most fun teachers to learn from are those who are engaging, make it fun. Every single word they say has a purpose. And I think I'm about to hit on a completely separate topic here, but it has to do with our identity. Is our attention spans are like, yeah, they are going down.
Crashing down.
We're crashing. We cannot, for the life of us, pick up a book and read more than 3 pages or 2 pages,
Or a
pick
page.
up a book, right? Or in some cases, learn about our religion, not in short form content, right?
I mean, in our lives, it used to be movies, DVDs first. You used to put it in. You couldn't even rewind that much. Then VHS or VHS, then DVD. Then you became movies. And then, you can't really wait for the ads. So then you got Netflix and all these streaming services. You could you don't even have to go to the movie theaters anymore. And then you moved on to short reels or videos on YouTube.
Yeah.
And now you move to these 30-second clips. And even those you're skipping through because you just want that level of dopamine release in your brain that's like, oh, something new, something interesting, something new, something interesting. Yeah. That's something really interesting. You are a Naat Khan, mashallah. You sing a poetry on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How important did you think that this attention was in order to... Obviously, you're born with a talent. You have a good voice. I don't think I have that great a voice. Some people are just born with it. Mm-hmm. They're not tone deaf. I'm tone deaf. You're definitely not tone deaf. But how much did you actually have to put forward into that with discipline, with attention? Yeah. To be able to become, I want to say, successful or semi-successful, not reciter.
There were times where I've spent 2 hours continuously practicing, and that comes from you putting a harmonium in front of me and hitting a note and listening to it and then matching my voice to the note. And I would practice one note for 10, 15 minutes straight. And then I'd move to the next. And then I'd move to the next. And then I'd move to the next. And I think because I grew up in a generation where I wasn't born into TikTok and Instagram, that's why I had that attention span where I needed to focus. And if I didn't focus, I wouldn't be able to hit what I needed to hit.
So on that, do you think that it helped you focus because you had a greater purpose you were aspiring to?
I think it did, because obviously I grew up in a very Islamic household. I grew up, whenever my mom was doing work in the kitchen or something, there were always nods playing. And she's looking at me and she's like, one day you're going to be up there. And I'm like, that's a big goal for me, where it's like, my mother wants to see me. And alhamdulillah, I feel like I got to one of those levels recently in Pakistan. I made it to QTV. And it was like kind of like a surreal moment, kind of seeing my face next to the QTV logo. It got me emotional, right? But in this life, we're always learning. I don't think I'll ever be someone that's like, I'm at an ustad level now.
Yeah.
But I feel like we're still growing and we're still learning. And that's the mindset you have to continue growing in the field that you want to grow.
On that, I think something for you both to think about, and it's for our audience to think about. I'd mentioned a greater purpose, and you were mentioning that. So doesn't it flow and follow then that a Muslim has no greater purpose than to fulfill the happiness of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and achieve Jannah? Is that not the greatest purpose of all?
It's the greatest purpose of all.
So then why do Muslims lack attention?
No, it's a
great question.
We needed that silence. It sort of hits, right? Attention deficit, it's in every part of our lives, right? You work, you need to concentrate to get work done eventually, right? Or you can be sitting a 9-to-5 job and maybe get only an hour's worth of work done, right? And so now productivity experts are like really promoting all these different techniques for you to get work done. Pomodoro cycles, for example. I work on Pomodoro cycles. I know I'm efficient if I follow a clock and I make sure I'm doing work, right? But there are many scholars that we look up to in our heritage, right? They would study all day long.
I mean, right? Imam Bukhari spent his whole life writing the books,
and right? They would sacrifice sleep. We say sacrifice sleep, but they got the sleep that they needed.
Oh yeah.
And they studied all day.
They wouldn't call it sacrifice. We call it sacrifice. Yeah. They would think of it as a welcome deduction from their life. You know?
Yeah.
So I think that's something to think about for all of us. And I think that if we continue with these podcasts that we're doing, inshallah, and I think that we really need to understand what our hard purpose is. It's not simply to live this life and then die. Yeah. There is, and again, what greater motivation does a Muslim need than Jannah? Yeah. Like what do you need? The problem is we haven't taught our children, our youth, our elders, and they haven't taught us what Jannah is. If you know what Jannah is, like if I tell you, hey guys, finish 3-4 books of these, pray 5 times a day for the next month or so, I'll give you a Bugatti. Damn, everyone will be praying. Yeah. And I often give this example. If I was to say, if there's a alim on the footsteps of every mosque, and they say every member of any community, any individual who comes into the mosque for Fajr Salah, I will give them $100. They will yank their kids out of the bed to come pray Salatul Fajr for the $100.
Yeah. So gratification, right? We're talking about being rewarded to do something.
Yeah.
If you can't materialize, right, your reward, it's hard getting people to do something, right? We know we live in the West, capitalist society. You work, you get money. Simple, right? You work 9 to 5, you get the money you need to feed your family, to have the roof over your head, and to live a quote unquote comfortable life. So we are already in this sort of flow of a system where we are being rewarded to do something, right? And so it sort of raises this thought process of we grow up here, we identify as Western people or people, Canadians, for example, or if you're in the US, Americans, and you then start learning about Islam, you are struggling with that identity. Are you adopting the Islamic identity? Are you foregoing another identity? Or are you amalgamating that identity? And so if you're adopting an identity, right, you're becoming a Muslim, you're becoming a well-practiced Muslim, aren't you putting choice in the matter, right? Like it's either I do this or I go play basketball with my friends. It's either I pray or I go play COD. It's either I, read the Quran in the morning, or I catch up on more sleep. So you're putting choices in place, right? Every day, everything we do is just a flow of choices. We have to take these choices. And I think we should step on to our next topic here.
Yeah, sorry, I want to end that with, there's a very beautiful saying, you are the sum all of your choices that you make.
Very true. And I think that sticks with your identity.
That's it. That is your identity. The choices that you make.
The choices you make is your identity at the end of the day, right? If you can't protect your identity, then you can't protect anything at all. You can't be anything, and you can't define your identity.
And no Muslim has their identity without reading the Quran. That's why it's so damn important to read the Quran with meaning, because only then do you realize the consequences of your choices and the rewards of your choices. That's why we follow the way of the Quran.
Very true. And so I like to see that adage, you are the sum of the 4 nearest or 5 nearest people to you, your personality, who you are, right? I find that to be very true. And the reason I say that is because when I entered university, I think I made loads of friends. I called them friends. I found myself chilling with them all the time, going to class with them, studying with them, or whatever it may be. I took a break from university for a year. I learned what true friendship is because I surrounded myself with people of my own faith. Now, we can definitely get into that, friendships of own faith or not. And then I started realizing what that friendship is doing for me. What is that companionship doing for me? It's giving me the opportunity to pray more, staying on top of my, practices of religion and praying and reading the Quran, right? So I started cutting off bad company, quote unquote bad company, right? Because that company was taking me away from all these actions. Yeah. So how did your friendships, Muslim or non-Muslims, influence your sense of identity?
You want to tackle this?
I think you can start us off.
Okay. I think that a friend is known by the company he keeps. And that's why it was so important for Islam as a whole, especially Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, particularly imparting to always stay with individuals that have a like mind, a like vision, and a like goal. I believe it was the saying of Hazrat Ali alayhi salam. I believe, don't quote me on it, it might be wrong, but definitely some Sufi or a saint within the Islamic realm, where he said that if you walk through a bazaar of perfume, you will smell good. And if you walk through a bazaar of ill-wanting rotten meat, you will smell like that rotten meat. Mm-hmm. So it's really about the environment that you grow up in, the people that you interact with. It's a whole different matter. If all of your friends pray, you will feel like the odd one out.
Yeah.
But if none of your friends pray and you're the only one that pray, you also feel like the odd one out. And you will try, it's just human nature to be a cohesive unit with the community that you're with.
Mold into,
and yes, you have an individual identity, but that individual identity is based on the community identity. And that community identity is simply based on, yes, your parents, up till the age of about really 9 years old. After that, people and children, they begin to have an identity of their own. Then you've got your immediate surroundings. So that's your siblings, your close family. Then it's your friends. And from 9 to about 50 years old or 40 years old, that's all friends. After that, you start having your own children. Then you have grandchildren. Then they become your identity. Yep. But that big chunk of the most important part of your life, where you're the strongest, you're the wisest, you're the fastest, you're the most intelligent, you've spent basically at the whim of how your friends are. And that's why you have to be unbelievably important in choosing your friends. They have to be fun, obviously. They have to be intelligent, obviously. And of course, they have to pull you and increase your iman. If they do not increase your iman, they are not worth your time, in my opinion.
True. Yeah, very true.
What do you think on this?
I think, going back to friends we make in high school. So I made a lot of friends in high school. Like, it was kind of like the norm. Oh, yeah, I have 35, 40 different friends. But the real friends stuck with me after high school finished. I had a friend come up to me, or I'd like to say, quote unquote, friend. He came up to me in, I believe it was grade 10. He came up to me and he offered me a joint. Now, he knows I'm Muslim. He knows I don't smoke. He offered me a joint, and I'm like, bro, I don't do this stuff, right?
Just take a blunt.
Yeah, he's like, just take it, right? And I'm like, no. And I'm like, no, I don't smoke. And he's like, no, it's free. It's on me. And I was like, that doesn't even matter to me, right? And after that, I cut that friend off. Now, 2 of the closest friends that I made were in middle school.
Sorry, I'm just going to interject here because you made a really important point. How hard is it to cut off friends?
I feel like you have
So I
to.
think that's a really important point. It's really
Yeah.
hard. It's easy to say, "Oh, I just cut him off,"
Mm.
but it's harder to actually pull through.
I
it.
would see him every day in school. We shared the same gym class,
Yeah.
but I had to think of the bigger picture, and I had to think that I'm a Muslim, and when people see me, they see Muslim.
And he's a bad influence on me.
and he's a bad influence on me, and I can't have people thinking that this is my circle, and I need to distance myself from this circle.
So did you distance it because of what people think or
No,
because of yourself?
because of myself, because we in that environment that we were in high school, I knew Muslims who were smoking. There was this actually, it doesn't relate to drugs, but there was one of my friends. He wasn't really a friend, but we were at Subway and he's ordering a chicken teriyaki, and I'm like, bro, it's not.
He's
halal.
a Muslim, you said?
He's a Muslim.
Yeah.
And I'm like, bro, it's not
It's the
halal.
Bismillah Muslims.
Yeah.
Bismillah.
he's like, no, bro, if you read Bismillah and you read a few surahs, you're fine. And I'm like, all right, what surahs do you read? He's like, I don't know, I just read Bismillah. And I was like, all right.
Yeah, I've heard the same. I've heard it the same.
And so I'm pretty particular with using the word friend now, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, I think when we're in high school and university, it's just proximity relationships that you have with people.
Yeah.
Because you're around these people all the time, you get on friendly terms with them, right? You meet them in class, you do homework together or schoolwork together, you work on group projects. Because you're so friendly and hang out during lunch, you're a friend now, right? So what does that friendship mean? What are you getting out of it, right? And it's bad to look at friendships like transactional interactions, right? So maybe don't go towards that route. But I started seeing friendships as a way of growing together, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had friends that I made after I left university, right? When I wasn't in high school anymore. And I started realizing I feel like I'm actually growing a lot more around these people, right? I didn't have to necessarily cut anyone off, because when you leave high school, you naturally just don't talk to people anymore.
Yeah.
Or when you leave university, you only end up talking to the people that you talk to every single day.
Right.
Right. So it wasn't like I'm not friends with you anymore. Don't talk to me anymore. Step away. It was just a gradual process. But I found like there's beauty in friendships, right? You'll notice that the people closest to you, you'll start using the same type of words when you speak, right? I spent 8 months in the UK. I started saying "in it" for some reason.
You still say it.
I do still say it. It's a bit weird. But my closest friend, he now says it, right? And he doesn't mean to say it, but it just naturally comes out, right? And I found that to be pretty cool. It means like, look at this friendship, right?
I want to add on to that. I have two friends. They're non-Muslim, right? When I sneeze or I see something nice, I'll say, oh, when I sneeze, alhamdulillah. When I see something nice, I'll say, mashallah.
You know what else has become mainstream? Wallahi.
Wallahi, that's booming
Wallah,
everywhere.
yeah.
But and when I make plans with somebody, they hear me on the phone and I'm saying inshallah. So we make a plan in like the group chat, and both of them will text inshallah, we'll meet you there. And it's kind of funny to me because they're not Muslim, but when they see something nice, like, oh, they're like, yo, you have a nice fit on, mashallah. And I'm like, yeah, I appreciate you.
Is it the type of inshallah that you're actually not going to be there? Or
No, it's the one that they'll be there. I know we use that card where we're like, inshallah, I'll be there.
I'll think about
Yeah,
it.
I'll
But I
think
think
about it.
we do have to be very careful with those words, especially
100%.
wallahi, because that means I swear to Allah.
yeah.
And I've heard kids use that in the mosque,
Yeah.
and you know that they're lying through their teeth.
They're literally.
Or even not lying. Like, why are you swearing by the name?
You don't
of
need to.
Allah,
Yeah.
Right?
Wallah, I didn't move that chair. You didn't need to say wallah.
You did.
But that explains so beautifully why Allah swears in the Quran then.
Yeah.
Because it's human nature. You want to believe me? I swear to Allah, I swear on my parents. Then Allah goes into the Quran, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَى. And he's swearing, I swear by the sun, I swear by the moon, I swear by this, and I swear by that, and I swear by this. And then he says, indeed, successful are these individuals and unsuccessful are these individuals.
That's powerful. That's very powerful. And just finding human tendency in that is
Yeah,
really
yeah.
interesting. So I want to go back to your point there, Abdullah. You're friends with people who are non-Muslim,
Yeah.
right? Is it necessary for young Muslims today to associate with other Muslims? Or, how does it impact their identity if they're friends with non-Muslims? Or to be the modern Muslim, growing in the path of Islam, should you only have friends that are Muslims? Right?
I think we need to find a middle ground because we do live in the West. We grew up in schools in the West, and not everybody that we go to school with is a Muslim. And I feel like it's maybe part of our job to also give those non-Muslims da'wah, like give them the message of Islam. And I feel like I kind of have started that. I don't want to throw out something, but two of my closest friends that I just mentioned, both of them have become more interested in learning about Islam and joining Islam, where they come up to me and they ask me, bro, let's go to Jummah. And there's one of my, you've met them. They've come to Jummah 3-4 weeks in a row with me.
That's good.
Yeah, and I think if I looked at them and I'm like, they're non-Muslim, I shouldn't be their friends, maybe they wouldn't have seen that change, and maybe they wouldn't have started coming towards the path of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
I think we start wrapping this podcast up. I know it's been a little while, but I have one final question, I think, just around identity and friends. What if you are the weakest link in your friends? What if you are the problem?
What does weakest link mean?
In terms of Iman, in terms of Islam. What if you are the person who's doing the drugs?
But why should that take you away from good companionship?
That's my question. So what do you do if, let's say, people have acted upon Abdullah saying where they're starting to cut you off now? Because they're like, this guy gives me a blunt every day. I don't want any blunt anymore because I got to pray. I can't be intoxicated. I can't be high. Being high is haram. By the way, that's a fact. Yeah. Like there's you can try to find loopholes around it. There's no loophole around it. Being intoxicated is haram. Period.
Point blank period.
Yeah, point blank period. So just want that to be clear because we've been talking about weed and joints and whatnot, and I don't want somebody to, take something out of context.
Light
and
one
say,
up while they're listening to us.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think we're definitely just talking about the positive route.
The positive.
Like you're saying,
the negative,
you're the person, the weakest link.
Right.
You're finding a way to now grow. The fact that you are thinking about good company or maybe approaching good company, in that case, that shows some positivity, right?
Shows an effort.
You are approaching those circles. But there is a flip side, right? What if that person has no perspective into that positivity?
That's my point.
Right? And that's where the general Muslim Ummah, the elder Ummah, the people that are younger as well, if we are learning about Islam, I feel like we play a huge, huge role in finding ways to better ourselves for the people around us, right? Dawah is not about preaching and yelling at people's faces. We know dawah, propagation, is about who you are and how you act. And the reason I say this is because nowadays there's a huge trending thing about dawah bros on TikTok and Instagram who reply to every single controversy, who replied about every single issue that maybe has to do with them or doesn't have to do with them, and they have an opinion about it, right? What steps are we taking to improve?
Have you guys seen that guy? It was such a viral video where he's holding up the whole plane because he's praying in the aisle of the plane. Have you seen that video?
I've seen that video.
He's literally praying 2 rakahs, and there's like Muslims literally being held up. The whole plane is being delayed because this man decided to pray inside while the plane was being boarded.
I've seen it. Yeah.
He didn't have the decency to pray outside. Perhaps I'm sure he was thinking,
maybe
like we always think
pause, right? We
give him the benefit of the doubt. Or I don't think he forgot. I think he was trying to set an example. Yeah. But you cannot set an example as a Muslim if it impedes other people's daily life.
Yeah.
Well, that's against the akhlaq of Rasulullah.
But they make the argument, right? Like, if I don't say it, who's going to say it? If I don't correct it, who's going to correct it? Right? I think, generally speaking, we're at a moral deficit. And I say that thinking about myself first and foremost, right? You think about where you want to be, the role models that we can look up to in our heritage in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? I think we can talk about role models in the next episode.
Sure, yeah.
But we look at those role models and we think, like, how far behind am I, right?
I want to beg. This might drag the podcast on a little bit longer. I really, and I strongly believe this, and I've had debate upon debate about this. I really don't think we're at a moral deficit in today's day and age.
I think we can debate about that.
The reason I say that, and this is just, I'm just going to touch on, maybe we can talk about it in some other episode. We all know what our moral duty and responsibility is. There is no one that says, I don't know that's right and wrong, because that's the human fitrah. Allah says, you know what's right and you know what's wrong. The problem with today's day and age is you don't care about the consequences of doing the bad, and you don't give a damn about the rewards of doing the good. And so you decide you cop out. You take the lazy route. You take the easy way out and you do whatever is easily convenient for you, your nafs and your ruh.
So is that not okay? I think I'm curious though. Is that not a moral deficit though? Because you're not acting on the righteous action.
No. So in my opinion, what it is you have the morality. You know what it is. There's no deficit in that regard. If there's a deficit, it's in the action of that moral. It's
so
in the
we're
actual
separating
adab.
the thought of what is right and wrong, right?
Yes.
Objective morality,
Yeah.
Versus acting on it.
Correct.
And
yeah.
I think that's probably what I'm trying to communicate
Sure,
here,
yeah.
right? Like we're maybe not acting on the righteous things, doing the right thing. Don't get me wrong, Muslims are doing great things today, right? There are great examples
Mashallah.
we can
Mashallah,
look up to.
yeah.
People who are working in their own industries, doing scientific research, acting as, people in political spaces representing us, right?
And we know individuals who've written thousands of books on Islam.
Yeah, 100%.
Hundreds of thousands of minutes in lectures.
Yeah.
So there's individuals who, Minhaj al-Quran and Minhaj Welfare Foundation spread through 92 countries?
92 countries.
So there's work being done.
There's work being done,
Yeah.
without a doubt. But I think we're talking about a general population in the West, right? Because there is
Muslims in the West or just generally in the
I
West?
think Muslims, because I can't speak to a general population.
Sure.
I can definitely speak to what I've witnessed in my daily interactions, right? You find the people who are drinking alcohol, you find the people intoxicating themselves because of the friends they make, because of the people around them. I know people who work in corporate spaces that they feel like they can't be promoted because they don't go to the bar after with their boss, right? They can't drink with their boss. Now imagine how hard that is in East Asian countries where that is culture, right? It is for you to drink with your coworkers.
The Western culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
East Asia.
East Asian. Okay.
Asia.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
It's probably a lot more toned down here now.
Yeah,
than
yeah,
it
yeah.
is in those spaces, right? There
Right.
exist places in the world that to grow in your job, you need to be drinking with your coworkers, right? So I think there's a back and forth here about who's to. I don't like the blame game. No one likes the blame game, but we know there's a deficit of some sorts. Abdullah, any last sharing thoughts before we wrap up here?
No, I think we covered a lot today. We had a lot of things written down, but we only made it past 2 topics.
And just for the audience's context here, we wanted to talk about local Muslim communities. We wanted to talk about not only your friends, but role models as well. And whether our role models of the past are still relevant today, right? And where we envision the future of young Muslims in the West. And I think we will definitely keep on touching on these topics in our future episodes.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening in. And inshallah, see you next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.